Saran City floated above the amber sea, its upper levels all polished glass and quiet escalators, air scrubbed until it smelled faintly sterile. The architecture was meant to soothe, but to Adrien Cole, it felt more like a lid clamped over life, keeping people orderly, contained, silent. He walked the evening arcade with the steady pace of a man who had carried weight through war and come back still upright. Broad-shouldered, early 40s, every movement carried the calm discipline of someone who had patched men together in zero-gravity compartments while gunfire rattled the walls. Those years were behind him, or so he told himself. Now he was a freight manifest auditor, his days reduced to scrolling screens, cross-checking numbers, stamping discrepancies, a job of precision but little pulse. He carried a hot cup of furlan seed coffee in one hand, the bitterness grounding him after hours of stillness, his other hand loose at his side, scanning the crowd out of old habit. He wasn't expecting the voice, small and trembling, that stopped him mid-step. "Sir, can you help me?" He looked down. A girl no older than 10 stood at his side, skin the pale lilac shade of her kind, white hair long and tangled from the wind, elf-like ears twitching nervously. Ink stains marked her small fingers, her patched clothes carefully mended, pride stitched over scarcity. She held up a thin card, made from scrap paper, its surface covered in uneven stars drawn with marker. Across the front, in crooked letters, it read Happy Mother Day. Her voice shook, but her eyes did not look away as she said, "It's my mom's birthday. She's lonely. Can you be my dad? Just for the party." Adrien crouched automatically, a man trained not to loom, meeting her at eye level. Her hands trembled as she held out the card, but she had rehearsed this. She wasn't asking for food, or money. Her plea carried something heavier. Behind her, on a stone bench, sat a woman. Her posture was straight, almost regal, though her bare feet touched the cold floor as if unsure she belonged there. Her skin was a deeper purple than the girl's, her white hair braided loosely, strands fraying at the ends. A thin shawl draped her shoulders, too light for warmth, and a black wrap clung tight across her frame-worn, practical, unfashioned. She looked proud, but pride had been weighed down by fatigue. Adrien's trained eyes caught faint white scars along her collarbone, old marks that told their own story. He recognized the look instantly. Displaced, not criminal, not careless, but someone who had fallen between the cracks when the system shifted faster than people could hold on. In her stillness, he saw exhaustion buried under dignity, the same expression he had glimpsed on abandoned soldiers left waiting for transports that never came. Adrien looked back at the girl. "What kind of party do you want, Naira?" She lifted her shoulders, uncertain. "Cake, candles, a ribbon. That's enough." The request was simple, almost painfully small, and it hit him harder than he expected. For her, celebration meant survival dressed in scraps. Adrien didn't pause to weigh the cost, didn't debate. He made the decision the way he used to when a man bled out and seconds mattered. Quick, clean, no hesitation. He stood, his voice steady. "Let's go get them." Callan Market gleamed too bright for comfort. Stalls lined with goods polished for residents who carried steady wages and government IDs. Attendants smiled rehearsed smiles, their words perfumed with courtesy that cut like glass. Adrien walked with the same quiet certainty he had once carried into field hospitals, his presence part shield, part command. Naira pressed close to his side, small hand clutching the edge of his jacket, while her mother Arya, he would later learn, followed at a cautious distance, her dignity worn like armor. Adrien chose a cream cake glazed with lore fruit nectar, modest but real. Then let Naira pick citrus-scented sugar candles and a cheap teal ribbon she clutched like treasure. When the vendor's gaze flicked to Arya's thin shawl and bare shoulder, his voice turned edged with polite cruelty. Maybe something less delicate, sir. Sugar smears easily. That fabric won't hold. Adrien met the man's eyes, silent, immovable. The weight of his stare pressed long enough for the smirk to falter. Without a word, Adrien tapped his wrist cred, took the box, and turned away. The moment left Naira smiling in shaky relief, her small hand still trembling but proud with the ribbon. Aria's chin lifted as she gave Adrien the faintest nod, her pride intact but gratitude flickering beneath. For Adrien, the decision was already sealed. He had found his purpose in the plea of a child, and the soldier in him answered with certainty. This wasn't charity. It was a mission. And missions, once begun, he never abandoned. They carried the cake and ribbon out of the market, the hum of the stalls fading as Adrien steered them into a quieter corridor at the city's edge. The polished glass walls curved toward a maintenance alcove, a forgotten pocket with a view opened over the amber sea. The water below moved in slow swells, catching the light like molten glass, while a nearby hatch hummed faintly with the breath of the city's machinery. It wasn't much, but to a girl clutching a teal ribbon-like treasure, it was enough. Naira spread her scrap paper card against the wall and began taping paper suns around it with fierce concentration, each lopsided circle bright against the sterile pane. Adrien crouched to help, his large hands steadying the corners while she pressed them flat. When the last one was up, she tied the ribbon around her mother's wrist with solemn care, her tongue caught between her teeth, her small hands trembling with the weight of ceremony. Aria held still, her dignity sharper than any words, but when Naira whispered, "Close your eyes," "Mom," she obeyed, lips pressed to keep them steady. Adrien struck the match and lit the sugar candles, the citrus scent sharp and sweet. The glow wavered against the glass wall, trembling like fragile hope. Naira's voice rose in a brave, off-key song, quivering but determined. Adrien's deep baritone joined hers, grounding the shaky notes with the calm steadiness of a man who had sung to wounded men in the dark just to keep them breathing. Aria opened her eyes when her daughter whispered, "Make a wish." For a moment she said nothing, her gaze caught between the flicker of the candles and the man standing steady beside them. Finally she said softly, "I wish for one day when my daughter forgets to be afraid." Then she blew out the candles, and the alcove filled with a sweet smoke that clung to their clothes like memory. They ate the cake with plastic forks, nectar sticky across fingers, Naira giggling when cream smeared across her nose. Adrien passed her a napkin without comment, the gesture so natural it startled Aria into the faintest smile, fragile but real. She stroked her daughter's hair as the girl leaned against her, already drowsy from sugar and excitement. For a moment, the tension in Aria's shoulders eased, her guarded posture slipping, her pride softened by the sight of Naira's joy. That was when the voice came, sharp as glass. Arcade policy discourages gatherings. A woman in a pale jacket had stopped at the alcove's edge, her gaze flicking not to the cake or candles, but to Aria's bare feet. Her shawl, the teal ribbon tied like defiance. Especially of this kind. The words were polite, rehearsed, but carried the same cruelty Adrien had heard too often in barracks and bureaucracies, rules wielded like weapons. He rose, straight-backed, his calm radiating like a shield. "This kind is a birthday," he said evenly. Silence stretched between them, Adrien unmoving, the steady calm of a soldier who didn't blink under fire. The woman frowned, hesitated, then left. Aria's eyes studied him closely, something testing in her gaze. "You're very certain," she said, her voice quiet but edged with suspicion. "I practice," he replied. She tilted her head slightly. "You were a soldier." He didn't deny it. "Medic, long ago. Now I count crates." Her expression shifted, and in that shift was recognition. He hadn't failed her test. She bent her head to brush crumbs from Naira's chin, her hand precise, her pride still wrapped around her like armor. Adrien watched them, feeling the weight of decision settle inside him. He had once kept men alive through battles no one wanted to remember. Now it seemed his mission had changed. It wasn't war anymore. It was this woman, this child, this moment carved out against the cold order of Saran City. And as Naira curled into her mother's lap, clutching her paper card like a relic, Adrien knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't walking away. The candles had burned down to sugar nubs, and the alcove smelled faintly of smoke and citrus when Naira drifted into sleep against her mother's side. Her small hand still curled tight around the folded paper card. Arya shifted to lift her, but Adrien stepped forward first, his movements careful, practiced, like he'd done this before. He slid his arms under the girl and lifted her easily, her cheek falling against his chest as though she'd been carried there all her life. For a moment, Arya looked ready to object, the pride that had kept her spine straight tightening her lips. But then she saw how steady he held her daughter. Not jostling, not careless, just calm, and she said nothing. She gathered the cake box and the teal ribbon instead, following silently as Adrien led them back into the brighter corridors. People turned their heads as they passed a man broad-shouldered with a child in his arms. A woman walking barefoot, a cake clutched like contraband, but Adrien's stride was unhurried, his jaw set, and no one dared to interfere. His apartment door slid open with a soft click, and the sensor light bloomed white against the narrow entry. The air inside was clean, faintly scented with broth and linen. Everything in the space was simple and ordered, a sofa just wide enough for two, a square table with 4 chairs, a single shelf stacked with folded blankets, and a balcony glass wall that looked out over the dark, rolling amber of the sea. It was modest, almost bare, but not empty. It was the space of someone who understood how order could keep chaos at bay. Adrien laid Naira down on the sofa with the same care he'd once used on wounded soldiers, sliding a folded blanket beneath her head. She stirred only once, curling tighter, the card still clutched in her small hand. Arya lingered in the doorway, scanning the room with quick, trained eyes, as if measuring exits and escape routes, her shoulders set in the posture of someone who had never been allowed to settle. "There's hot water," Adrien said evenly, setting the cake down on the counter. "Towels on the rack." His tone was neither invitation nor command, just a flat offering, practical and precise. Arya stayed by the table, fingers smoothing the crease in the teal ribbon, her shawl slipping from one shoulder before she tugged it back into place. Finally, she asked, "Why do you live alone in a place this clean?" It wasn't small talk. It was a probe, a test. Adrien leaned against the counter, arms crossed, meeting her gaze. "I was a medic too long around chaos. Order sticks after that. I keep it clean because it keeps me calm." Her eyes flicked to her sleeping daughter, then back to him. "And now you count crates." His mouth curved, the ghost of a smile. "Keeps people honest, or at least accounted for." Arya's lips tightened. "People like us don't get counted. Not unless we cause trouble." Adrien didn't argue. Instead, he filled a small pot and set it on the stove, the hiss of the burner filling the silence. Steam rose, softening the air. He turned and said, "I can't change Saran City, but I can set one rule here." Her eyes narrowed, wary. "And what's that?" He held her gaze, steady as ever. "You don't disappear when the door closes." The words seemed to hit her like something sharp swallowed too quickly. She studied him for a long moment, eyes searching for the hidden cost, for the trap that kindness usually carried. When she found only calm, she looked away, her throat working as if she'd bitten down on words she didn't want to release. Without answering, she moved toward the bathroom, Her steps quiet but deliberate. Adrien stayed at the stove, listening as the water ran. He stirred absently, his ears tracking the sound of her movements behind the half-closed door, the rhythm of running water, loosening something in the air. When Arya finally stepped out, she wore the oversized shirt he had left draped on the chair. It hung loose on her frame, slipping at one shoulder despite her attempt to adjust it. Her hair was damp, strands clinging to her neck, her skin warmer now that the salt and dust had been washed away. She moved cautiously, like someone unsure if she was trespassing. Adrien glanced up and back to the pot, respectful but not blind. "Better," he said simply. She touched the shirt hem, her voice quiet. "It's soft." There was no gratitude in her tone, only honesty, but beneath it, a tremor betrayed relief she couldn't hide. Naira stirred then. Mumbling in sleep, and Arya crossed quickly, kneeling to brush her daughter's hair back, murmuring, "She'll ask questions tomorrow. She always does." Adrien set 2 mugs on the table, pouring the water into them with unhurried precision. "Then I'll answer," he said. Arya froze for half a beat, eyes narrowing again, weighing whether to trust a man who kept making promises without asking permission. He didn't press. He slid a mug toward her side of the table, steam rising between them like a fragile truce. "No further promises tonight," she said finally. Adrien nodded once. Agreement. Not victory. The words landed with the weight of someone who understood the difference. Arya sat slowly, her fingers curling around the warmth of the cup. And for the first time since he had met her, the sharp lines of suspicion eased. If only by a fraction, that morning seeped into the apartment through the balcony glass, the sea below catching the early light in swells of pale gold. Adrien was already awake, sleeves rolled, hair damp from his own shower, moving with quiet precision at the counter. The scent of furlan seed coffee filled the air, mingling with the warmth of Zyran bread crisping in the oven. On the sofa, Naira blinked awake, still clutching the wrinkled birthday card in her small hand. Her ears twitched, adjusting to the unfamiliar quiet, but when she saw her mother seated at the table, she let out a soft sigh of relief. Arya sat with her legs tucked beneath her, Adrien's oversized shirt draped over her shoulders, the teal ribbon now tied neatly around her wrist. She looked cleaner, steadier, though the guarded lines around her eyes remained. Adrien set a plate on the table with slices of bread spread in Orvan cream, berry syrup glistening in thin lines across the surface. "Breakfast before questions," he said, voice calm but firm, as if it were an old order in a new home. Naira dug in with delight, too fast, cream sticking to her fingers. She laughed nervously, glancing at Adrien as if waiting to be scolded, but he only passed her a napkin with quiet authority. "Rules," he said again, steady, not harsh. The girl brightened and swung her legs under the chair. But after a few bites she looked up, eyes serious. "Are you going to send us away when it gets dark?" Adrien paused with his coffee halfway to his lips, set it down, and answered only when he was certain his voice wouldn't waver. "I don't take people in for one night just to put them back on the street. If you want to stay, you stay." Arya stiffened across the table, her hand tightening on her mug. "You don't even know us," she said, suspicion sharp in her tone. Adrien met her eyes. "I know enough. Your daughter is brave. You've been carrying too much. That's enough for me." Silence stretched, heavy with the things left unsaid. Naira broke it with her small, determined voice. "If we stay, can I put drawings on the wall?" Adrien leaned back slightly, weighing the question as if it were a contract. "Depends. What kind of drawings?" She grinned. "Paper suns and flowers. Maybe us." His answer was a single nod. Then yes. Later that morning, they stepped back into the city together. The polished corridors didn't feel as suffocating with Adrien, walking slightly ahead, his presence clearing space without aggression. At the shoe stall, Naira giggled when the merchant measured her foot with a cold metal loop, stamping her new boots proudly against the floor. Adrien paid without haggling. For Arya, he chose a coat, plain gray but lined for warmth, holding it out with the same calm he used to hand soldiers their gear. She resisted at first, pride making her jaw tight, but Naira tugged her sleeve and whispered, "You look strong in it, Mom." That broke through. Arya let the merchant drape it over her shoulders. She said nothing, but when they walked on, she didn't take it off. At a plant stall, Adrien chose a small sky lily in a clay pot, its leaves pale but alive. He handed it to her without explanation. "Why?" she asked, wary. "Every home needs something alive," he said. Her fingers tightened on the pot, her throat working as though the simple statement carried more weight than he intended by midday. They carried a small bag of essentials: boots, coat, salt crisps Naira had begged for, and the sky lily. Back in the apartment, Naira scattered her drawings across the floor, taping suns above the door with fierce determination. "So we don't forget which home is ours," she announced. Arya's throat tightened, but she didn't stop her. She set the lily on the balcony table, tying the teal ribbon around its pot as if sealing something unspoken. Adrien joined her, standing steady at her side, his gaze on the horizon. "You came here from where?" he asked. Her lips pressed thin, resisting, but finally she spoke. "Outer Rings. When the mines shut down, there was no work. We followed transports until we reached here. Saran promised stability." Her laugh was bitter low. "Stability for residents, not for us." Adrien nodded, eyes on the water. "You stayed in the cracks." "Yes," she said quietly. "And when the crates were cleared, so were we." Adrien turned his head slightly, his voice blunt. "Then let this place stay." "I won't clear you." The words struck her harder than he knew. She went still, staring at him, fear and hope colliding in her eyes. For the first time, her gaze carried no suspicion, only the danger of believing too quickly. She stepped closer, her shoulder brushing his arm, almost without realizing. "You say it like it's already decided," she whispered. "It is," he said, steady as always. Silence held between them, the hum of the city faint beyond the glass. Inside, Naira called, "Look." I drew us with a flower. The child's stick figures waved from the wall, the sky lily sketched large and proud beside them. Arya turned, her chest tight. Adrien didn't move, only stood steady as ever, as if he had already taken responsibility without needing our permission. And for the first time in years, Arya felt the fragile edges of her pride soften, not because she had given them away, but because someone had treated them as worth keeping. The apartment filled with the scent of simmering Drax mushrooms by evening, the broth rich and earthy, as Adrien stirred it with the same efficient calm he had once carried into field hospitals. His movements were precise, no wasted motion, every slice of root and turn of the spoon measured, as if cooking itself were a kind of triage. Arya sat at the table, a needle between her fingers as she mended the loose hem of Naira's tunic. The oversized shirt she wore belted with her old shawl into something almost like a dress. Her hair, washed clean and braided anew, hung neat down her back, though strands still escaped in soft waves around her face. Every so often, her eyes lifted from the stitching to follow Adrien's movements, her gaze lingering longer than she meant, snapping back down to her work each time he looked up. On the floor, Naira sprawled among scraps of paper and colored markers, Adrien had dug from a drawer, humming tunelessly as she drew uneven suns, stick figures, and a towering flower labeled our luck lily in crooked letters. The room felt fuller, warmer, as if 3 different rhythms were slowly beginning to weave together. "Adrien, were you really a medic?" Naira asked suddenly, her small voice bright but insistent. He didn't pause in stirring, only said, "Yes." She scribbled another stick figure with a red cross on its chest and tilted her head. "Did people die?" Adrian's hand stilled on the spoon. He glanced at Arya, who had gone completely still, her eyes fixed on him, braced. His voice, when it came, was steady but careful. "Yes, but more lived." Naira seemed to consider this, then drew a larger figure with a wide smile. "That's you." The words pressed something heavy into the air, silence wrapping around them until Arya's voice broke it, low and guarded. "She asks because I never told her what soldiers did. I didn't want her to think war was normal." Adrien set the spoon down, his expression unchanged. "She deserves answers, but only the ones right for her age. Nothing more." His tone carried no judgment, only calm certainty. Arya's fingers tightened around her needle, then slowly loosened again. "And if she asks you questions I can't bear to hear?" Adrian's reply came without hesitation. "Then you leave the room. I'll answer for both of us." The bluntness of it disarmed her. She bent her head back to her stitching, but her breathing was lighter than before, as if she had been bracing for a fight that hadn't come. The broth was ready soon after. Adrien portioned it evenly into bowls, setting one in front of each of them with quiet precision. Naira dug in immediately, blowing on her spoon before slurping noisily, giggling when steam fogged her ears. Arya lifted hers more carefully, tasting it slow. The flavor made her eyes close briefly, longer than she intended, and when she opened them again, she found Adrien watching her. She swallowed and said, "You cook like a soldier, precise, no wasted motion." Adrien sat across from her, his expression unreadable. Old habits. Efficiency kept people alive. Arya's gaze lingered, her voice quieter this time. "And now you're feeding us. That's not efficiency. That's choice." The words slipped out heavier than she had meant, and she turned her attention back to the bowl before he could answer. Later, after dishes were rinsed and stacked in disciplined rows, Naira curled under a blanket on the sofa. Her new boots still laced and her drawings scattered around her. Her small breaths came steady and even, her hand curled over the corner of her paper suns. Arya stood near the balcony, her hands wrapped around a mug, watching the city lights flicker across the black water. Adrien joined her, his shoulder brushing the frame as he leaned against it. "You said we wouldn't disappear when the door closed," she said quietly. "But what happens when the city notices us here?" Adrien didn't look away from the horizon. "Someone will, eventually. They always do. But they don't check my door. I don't give them reason. And if they do, then I stand between you and them." Arya's lips pressed thin. "You speak like it's that simple." He turned slightly, calm, steady in his voice. "It is. At least for me." She studied him, searching for cracks in his certainty, some hidden demand waiting to surface. Instead, she found steadiness, unyielding in a way that unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. She stepped closer, her arm brushing his. He didn't move away. "Why us?" she asked at last, her voice quieter than the hum of the vents. "There are hundreds like me, thousands. Why stop for?" Adrian's answer was short, almost blunt, because she asked. The simplicity of it struck her like a blow. She dropped her gaze, hair falling across her face to hide the small tremor in her mouth. Behind them, Naira stirred in her sleep, mumbling, "Don't let us go tomorrow, Adrien. Please." Both adults froze. Adrian's voice was steady when it came, unwavering. "I won't." Arya closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. When she opened them, she found herself standing closer to him, her hand brushing his forearm as if testing its solidity. He didn't pull back, didn't press forward. He simply let her decide. Her hand lingered, the warmth of his skin steady under her trembling fingers. And in that stillness, she felt something more dangerous than any cruelty, the weight of trust she hadn't meant to give. Days began to settle into weeks before Arya quite realized it. The rhythm of the apartment softening from borrowed shelter into something that felt like routine. Each morning carried the same cadence. Naira at the table with crumbs on her cheeks and ink stains on her fingers. Adrien steady at the counter brewing Ferlin seed coffee. Arya smoothing her shawl or tightening the belt of her coat as if reminding herself not to look careless. The walls slowly changed. Where once they had been blank, now paper suns clung in uneven rows, crooked flowers and stick figures with smiling faces taped above the sofa and by the door. The sky lily on the balcony had put out a new stem, its pale leaves tilted toward the amber light. Adrien said nothing about it, but Arya caught him checking the plant every morning, the way he once checked the pulse of men in his care, as if life in any form deserved to be measured and guarded. One afternoon, after he finished his shift early, he returned to find Arya seated on the balcony, the sea wind catching her white hair. She wasn't sewing, wasn't tidying, wasn't braced for interruption. She was just sitting, watching the horizon. For once, the lines around her mouth were soft. Adrien stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, and said simply, "You're smiling." She looked up, startled that he had noticed, then let her gaze steady on him. "For once, there's nothing to brace against," she murmured. He stepped closer, the steady calm of him filling the space between them without force. "Then keep it," he said. "That's what this place is for." Naira barreled out of the other room, her new boots half-laced, arms wrapping around Adrien's waist with a child's fearless certainty. "We're a family now," she declared. "I told Mom you're not allowed to change your mind." Adrien bent, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, his voice even. "Good, because I wasn't planning to." Arya watched, her throat tight, her chest caught between laughter and something heavier. For the first time since he had met her, her face held no suspicion at all, only the fragile peace of someone who had finally stopped running. That night, when Naira slept curled beneath her blanket, teal ribbon still tied around her wrist, Arya lingered at the table with Adrien. She reached for his hand deliberately, no test this time, her fingers trembling only once before tightening around his. He let her hold first, gave her the choice, then closed his grip steady around hers. "You've given me more than a roof," she said quietly. "You gave me back the right to choose. And I choose you." Adrien didn't answer with words. He leaned in, his kiss steady, his touch careful but certain, and Arya responded not with hesitation, but with the surety of someone committing to a decision long deferred. They moved into his bedroom quietly, the door closing with a soft click that sealed the moment apart from everything outside. Her coat slid from her shoulders, her scars bare under the fall of her shirt, and his hands mapped them with the same discipline he had used to read wounds, not to judge, but to understand. She pressed her lips to his, urgent and softer, as if testing how much she was allowed to want. He never pushed, only steadied her, letting her guide the pace. What began cautious grew into certainty, the tension she had carried for years bleeding away with every touch, every whispered word. When she finally let go, her voice broke into a sound she hadn't made in years. Muffled against his shoulder, and he held her through it, his arms strong and unyielding, as if carrying her weight cost him nothing. After, they didn't separate. She stayed curled against him, her breath slow, his arm around her waist, his chest rising steady at her back. She whispered into the dark, almost too soft to hear, "This is home." Adrien pressed his lips to her hair, his voice low, certain. "It is." And for the first time, she believed it completely. When morning came, pale light spilling over the balcony, the apartment carried the quiet rhythm of a household that no longer felt temporary. Naira woke laughing at the glass rail, drawing new suns for the door. Arya carried the sky lily to the light, the teal ribbon tied firm around its pot. Adrien brewed coffee, his hands steady, his eyes calm. The city outside still hummed with rules and order, but in here, none of it mattered. Here, they didn't disappear when the door closed. Here, they had a home,